going to tell you the most embarrassing story that has ever happened to me in my entire life. It's also my most prideful moment in my entire life and my most selfish moment in my entire life. I was a sophomore in high school, and so you can almost picture that like sophomore-ness, angsty teenager, and my school was having this free book like fair thing where everyone who attended got a free book. Now, Jubilee, as a high schooler, didn't like reading. Didn't really open books. But she loved the idea of getting books. Still do.
Nope.
Especially getting free books or cheap books. That's my story. So I decided I was going to go, even though I had no friends that were going to go with me. And I was like, I'm going to do it by myself and it's going to be okay. So I walk into our library and I see it. I was like, that's Elizabeth from my German class. We are not that close, but we're close enough that I can pull the best like little pranky, like little joke with her. We'll laugh it off and it's going to be great. So I come up with this whole big plan. I'm going to walk up to her. I'm just going to steal something off of her plate of free snacks. Not like there was not a whole table right next to her of free snacks. And I'm going to just take something off her plate, and it's going to be completely okay because, like, we're all just going to joke and laugh it off. So I walk up, and I do just that. I pull my plan into complete action, my guys. And, like, it was going so well. She didn't see me. I walked up. I reached up. This plate was up here. I was a little short. Still have not grown, but it's okay. And I take something off her plate, and then the world slows down to like 10 times speed, right? Because this girl turns around, and she is not Elizabeth.
Yeah, it's not her.
It's not Elizabeth from German. So then I have a question to ask y'all. What do you do when you get caught red-handed? When you are in the act of doing the wrong thing, what do you do? Do you like stop, freak out, be like, I didn't do it, it wasn't me. That's not my intent at all. Do you do like in the cartoons where it's like you're about to punch somebody and then like your boss or like your mom turns around and you're like, yeah, I was just gonna give him a little high five. Or like, do you do what I did and you own up to it and you almost dare the person to question you about what you were doing? Like, yeah, I punched you. What are you gonna do about it? Yeah, so that's what I do. I take this brownie bite off of fake Elizabeth, this complete stranger's plate, and say, I'm sorry. I thought you were somebody else. Turn around and walk away. I took this bite out of this brownie bite. And see, now to this day, I'm telling you, my friends, that every time I see those brownie bites, I always think of fake Elizabeth, and I wonder if fake Elizabeth thinks of me back.
So what you're telling me is that Heidi, you need to get brownie bites for service tonight.
You were on the same page as me.
But I want to ask y'all, what was your most prideful moment? I can almost tell you what might be the disciples' prideful moment that Jesus gives them a heart check on. And that's going to be in Mark chapter 9, verse 33. And as we're flipping there, I'm going to give you just a little bit of context. This is about Jesus' third year into ministry. This is probably his last few moments on earth, right before he leaves to go into crucifixion. So this is not the disciples' first rodeo. This is not their first time spending a little bit with Jesus. So you're going to see in these verses how Jesus had to really do a heart check really quickly with them. So in Mark chapter 9, verse 33, it starts like this. After arriving into Capernaum and settled in the house, Jesus asked the disciples, what were you discussing out on the road? But they didn't answer because they had been arguing about which one of them was the greatest. He sat down and called the 12 disciples over to him and said, "Whoever wants to be first, take last place, and be a servant of everyone else." Then he put a little child among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Anyone who welcomes a little child on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me not only welcomes me, but also welcomes the Father." So we see in these verses that Jesus is walking with his 12. He's going from one city to the next city. And just like you do on any other hike, you're talking with your friends. And they're probably just having a very bro moment on the road. And they're like, hey, they're probably just like, the question's like, hey, which one do you think is like Jesus' best friend? And then they're like, well, here on earth, John is obviously Jesus' best friend, but in heaven. And you can almost hear the disciples start being like, what do you mean you're the greatest disciple? Because in verse 34, Mark is very clear that they are arguing about which one of themselves is the greatest. So they have this very strong pride moment of saying, I am better than you, and here is why. And the thing is that this is a mindset that goes and contradicts Jesus' whole 3 years worth of ministry. This changes every moment that the disciples have ever spent with Jesus by them saying it's a me first attitude. So Jesus has to adjust it very quickly. Because if he realizes that his time here on earth is coming to a close, and this is the mindset that he's leaving his disciples in, it's going to be really hard when Jesus is no longer there with them. So, the thing is that when we look at pride, we kind of think of this mindset of, I don't struggle with that. That's not me. Why? Because I'm not that one guy who goes to the gym and puts all the weights on the gym, on the little things, and lifts all this weight, and I'm not that guy who beats on his chest and screams in your face saying, how dare you only lift 10 pounds when I can lift 210. Or we think of the car, in the movies, of that one lady or that one man who just owns way too much money, and she can just sit there with her nice old prestigious dog and talk about all the cars and talk about all the money and all the shoes that she owns. And we're like, well, we don't have that mindset. That's not me. I don't sit there and talk about all the things I have or where I'm going in life. But you see, pride is just simply thinking of yourself too much. We see this in verse 34 when the disciples are very quiet on the fact of what they were talking about on the road. If they were okay with the fact that they were prideful, then they would have just told Jesus, this is what we were talking about, and it will be fine. They knew that they were in the wrong. So, as I was writing my sermon, I was thinking about my own self. I grew up in church, and I said, I don't struggle with pride because I have learned from a very young age that pride is something that the Lord completely says no to, so I am never going to think too highly of myself. Which led to this very worldly definition of if we think that pride is simply just thinking too highly of ourselves, then the opposite is humility, which means we have to think lower than ourselves. The more trash talk I can talk about myself, the better of a person I am, because at least I'm not inflating my ego. But this is kind of a reverse pride within itself. You see, in my own story, this is exactly what I struggled with. I believed that I was unworthy because of my own sins, which led me to the personal self-talk that led me to a diminishing view of myself. And it wasn't until one person in my life sat across from me at the table when I'm literally talking bad about my own life and my own life decisions, about how poorly I have made them, where she goes, "Stop talking about my friend like that." And I had to sit there. And I had to reevaluate myself. I am somebody's friend. I have value to somebody else. The same value that I put to people who are my friends. The same value that I put to the people that I love. And if I talked, or anyone talked about the people that I loved and cared about, a fraction of the way that I talked about myself, I'll be up in arms, which is kind of scary because I'm little. But the thing is that humility is not simply talking less. It's not simply talking less of yourself, but talking less of you. See, Jesus knew his value. Jesus never walked around, and you can see it in the gospel over and over and over again. He never talked about himself poorly. Instead, Jesus turned the value back onto the people that he was reaching and he was ministering. How can I make that person see their worth to God that I can present to them? That was all of Jesus' mission. In Romans 8:16, Paul writes that his spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share in his suffering. This is literally Paul telling us that we are heirs to the throne. So if we were to have this humility that the world tells us, that we are to speak garbage about ourselves, that we are to speak so low about ourselves so that we can be humbled people, then we are saying that kings and queens are supposed to talk poorly about themselves. And that is not true. I don't think any righteous or worthy king in any place is allowed to talk poorly of themselves. I don't think any prince or any ruler, any president, or any governing official will have any respectable authority if they walked around as if they are not valued. And I think that is the most important thing that Christ wants to address. That is not simply saying that I don't value myself, but how can I make sure that other people value them? When we look into rulers, the most impactful rulers are the ones who don't just care about themselves, but care about the people that they're caring for. In Christ-like humility is thinking less of yourself. It's not just thinking less of yourself, yet thinking of yourself less. It's not thinking that you are unworthy, yet saying, I can see other people's worthiness even if they can't see it for themselves. It's saying, I'm going to be selfless and put others first. And I think Jesus says it the best way in Mark 9:35. Whoever wants to be first must take last place and be a servant for everyone else. Jesus wanted to make his disciples recognize that pride shouldn't be the thing that we are known by. Yet, serving one another is. when I actually started to embody what God's humility looks like in my personal life, I started to ask the question on how can I best serve other people? How can I get other people to best see their value that God has put in their life? And for me, that meant that I had to start holding things that I hold value to myself and give it freely to others. And my most valuable thing was my time. I used to spend so much time to myself that all I ever thought was about myself. And it wasn't until I started open-handedly giving other people just a fraction of my space and my time that I can actually start seeing them for the value that they are. So this week, I want to challenge you to spend 30 minutes intentionally thinking of someone else first. It can be someone that you have discipled, or it can be someone that you have never met. It can be that person in the grocery store. It could be your kids. But to serve one another and to show God's value. Bow your heads with me today. Dear Lord, you are so, so good. That you love us no matter what. That you call us out of this prideful mentality that it is simply about me first. And yet, God, you could have easily walked in and corrected every disciple in that room. You could have told them who was actually first in the kingdom. And yet, you did a whole complete heart and posture change. And Lord, I thank you that you want to do that exact same thing with us today. That you want to do this complete heart and posture change in us. That you want to take away this prideful attitude, Lord, and replace it with a heart that's worth serving, with a heart that sees the value in others and reaches out to them. Lord, as we go on through this week, Lord, help us see the people the way that you see them and move in compassion the way that you move. In Jesus' name.